All right, continuing with measurements of development and what it is that people do, right? We've talked before about the four basic divisions of labor, right? Primary economic activities, secondary, tertiary, quaternary, and now the fifth one that they've added somewhat later is quinary. All right, so primary basically involves taking products out of the ground, extraction of raw materials, right? It's less paying because it has the least amount of skill. Not to say that farmers aren't skilled. We know that that's not true. But it's the least amount of skill, least paying. Countries that are typically in the periphery are heavily involved in primary economic activities, right? So they are low wage earners. So typically people in the core will exploit people for this primary activity. Secondary is taking that raw material and making it into something, manufacturing, right? You see on there processed foods, cars, and chemicals. A little higher level of skill, a little higher level of wages. Tertiary is the service industry, right? A lot of finance, bankers, lawyers, things like that. Quaternary, exchange of money and goods. Quinary tends to be research and higher education. Right? As you move up from primary to quinary, right, you move up in wages, you move up in skill level. So you will find more tertiary and up core areas, right? Down, you'll find periphery and semi-peripheral areas. So if I'm looking at development, right, if I want to see what kind of country this is, what level of development, I might look at what is it that people are primarily engaged in. What kind of work, right? And that will tell me a lot about what they're making, what development. We know that peripheral countries are typically subsistence agriculture. Agriculture is primary, right? Countries like the United States are post-industrial. We don't make so much stuff anymore. We are more innovators. We are service providers. So we're going to be higher up and we're going to make more money, which typically comes to a in the ladder of development, we're higher up on that ladder. All right, what do you want to add into this as far as development determination? Well, you want to look at what kind of resources does the country have. Core countries typically have more resources. You want to look at education-wise, right? Higher skill usually means higher education, higher literacy, higher standard of living. Right, so the higher level economic activities you're involved in, the higher your level of development. One of the things that they have been hitting over and over and over again, if you've been watching the AP review, is the difference with gender, right? Gender imbalance. They have been talking about how this reaches across all of the units that we've been studying. So big hint in my book that there may be some kind of gender imbalance question on the test. Understand the differences between men and women. I don't care if you agree with it or not agree with it, right? But you want to be able to discuss the fact that if you're looking at a peripheral country, right, women are typically the ones at home doing the work because the men have left to go to the cities to look for higher paying jobs, right? Use Kenya as an example, right? Men have left the places where they grow the tea and coffee. They own the land. They get the money from the companies. Women and children do the work and they're not really getting paid that much, right? So there's a gender imbalance. Women typically make less, even in core countries, right? Women typically will make less than a man for the same job. And it's historical, right? We didn't want to take jobs from men who were the heads of households and give them to women. They were reserved for men because they were the ones who made the money. Even though we know that there are single family households run by men and women, right, who need the money regardless of the gender. You also want to be able to talk about the fact that women typically aren't given loans, particularly in peripheral countries, because by law they can't own property and you have to have property for collateral. You can tie this into population as well, right? Women having more and more children where they have fewer and fewer opportunities to be in the workplace or to go to school. Right, so you probably want to be able to talk about gender across a lot of issues. All right, let's go to Wallerstein. right? Wallerstein's world system theory. We used to talk about first, second, and third world areas. First world being us, right? Those that had democratic capitalist systems. Second world typically were communist systems that weren't us. And then everybody else was third world. Over time, the definition kind of took on new meaning. It really wasn't a second world so much anymore. But there was first world. Everything that was good was first. Everything that was bad was third world. And it's not a very satisfying way to define countries because it does play into a lot of prior issues of racism and Eurocentrism, where those of us from Europe think of ourselves as being the best, right? Because Europe has always felt that way. So Wallerstein's system's a bit more factual without being so judgmental. Though you will see again, like we talked about a minute ago, some people will use, MDC, more developed countries, and LDCs, less developed countries. But Wallerstein uses the core and the periphery, right, and the semi-periphery. And why Wallerstein's theory is different is because he is looking at how these areas interact with each other, not whether one's democratic and the other one's communistic. How do they interact with each other, right? The core is everything that's good, right? They've got all the good stuff, but they have got it through the systematic exploitation of the periphery, right? By using them for their cheap labor and their raw materials, and then turn around and selling those goods back that we manufacture to those countries for high profit. The semi-periphery is typically a country that has a little bit of both. It has areas of core and has areas of periphery, and you'll still see that exploitation going on even within that country, right? Areas of the core might exploit areas of periphery within its own country, right? This plays into, what we looked at before, the structuralist theories or the dependency models, right? That the core makes the periphery dependent upon them for structural loans, for employment, right? We exploit the needs of the core the needs of the periphery to benefit the core. This dependency goes back to, and you can talk about colonialism, right, where we came in and took over the country both politically and economically. And now that politically that the colonial master may have left, there is still that dependent relationship economically where the periphery has had its raw materials and labor taken from it. And they really don't have anything else to offer, and the core still continues to use that relationship, right, to continue to put itself at the core. Let's see where we're going to go next. Rostow's ladder of development. This is another theory of how countries develop, and again, if you look at Rostow, he's coming from a European perspective. He's using Great Britain as his example, that everybody's like Great Britain, right? We will all develop, and we will eventually get to here, stage 5 of that model. Remember, there are 5 stages. Traditional, where everybody's agricultural. Preconditions to takeoff, right? A country that is starting to move away from agriculture. It's got a lot of stuff going for it. Maybe investors, has a real receptive government, right? And then eventually they will get to 3, takeoff. Because of what has happened here, things will start to move them along. Drive to maturity, and then finally age of mass consumption. Core countries are here. Peripheral countries are here. Peripheral is still stuck in stage 2. If you look at this, of course, you should think about the demographic transition theory, stages 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Stage 2 being the peripheral country, and that eventually they'll get here. What is wrong with Rostow's model is that it is only looking at the trajectory of really one country. It is looking at the trajectory of a country like Great Britain. But Great Britain colonized and exploited its way up the ladder. Peripheral countries don't have that opportunity, right? We really look down on colonizing. Now we did it in the past, but now we don't like it very much, even though under neo-colonialism we still maintain those relationships. But the peripheral country doesn't have anybody to step on, and they are not going to be able to make their way up the ladder the same way. And understand too, the core is putting pressure on that peripheral country to keep it peripheral so the core can stay core. So Rostow's model is not looked upon very highly anymore. One, because of its bias towards European countries, and secondly, it's unrealistic to think that the peripheral countries can make the same jump, right, without having the same amount of opportunity to exploit, without having the same level of income or investment that core countries seem to have. So they are going to be stuck on that model and not move out any further. All right, that is the end of this one. You're going to have that quiz. Again, I urge you to study before you take the quiz. And then we'll move on to the last unit, which kind of is going to jump us back a bit.